Before covering this section, I wanted to just do a quick reminder. I asked my students what exactly is history, how would they define it, and I always use the example in class. Like, I honestly think history is like a giant Netflix show, and history is just the story of everything that's ever happened. And history is like a giant Netflix movie, and it has all kinds of stories. Some of the shows are fun, some are sad, some are awesome, some are boring. And this section of our text is honestly, I think, super cool. The story of a slave revolt um, led by Sengbe Pieh. And again, always, if my pronunciation is off and if someone knows better than I do, please do let me know. This story is awesome. And I used an example like I'm watching two shows on Netflix right now, The King and Babylon Berlin. This is about King Henry V. Honestly, I didn't think it was that good. I really wasn't a big fan of it. So, like, that portion of history, that Netflix show, like, I think that one's kind of boring. Babylon Berlin, on the other hand, is covering like Germany in the 1920s in between the wars, and it's fascinating. I really, really like that story. I view that story as awesome. And if this chapter, Sengba Pieh, his story, is on Netflix, I think this chapter is super cool. It involves the evils of slavery, it involves a revolt, the above deck of a slave ship, and then it ultimately ends with a good story. And our old friend John Quincy Adams comes in too. So, first, we have to set the stage. This story is going to take place in 1839, and we can return to previous concept. We've talked about the triangular trade, this idea of all kinds of goods were shipped between three continents: Africa, North America, and South America, facilitated mostly in the beginning by European traders. And for a long time, that included slavery. The Middle Passage was the route that slaves took to refer to areas from Western Africa here to South America into North America. But the thing that we have to remember is, again, this story takes place in 1839. Slavery, the importation of slavery, had been abolished in 1808. That meant that goods and services could still be traded amongst the three different areas, but slavery, they couldn't bring in any more slaves into the United States. Slavery could still exist, but you couldn't import slavery. And we have to go back and kind of think like, remember, a lot of the smartest people in America eventually thought slavery would just go away. No one, Thomas Jefferson referred to it as a slavery as like you're holding a wolf by the ears. You don't like it, but you don't want to let it go, because that option's worse. But they thought eventually in the beginning that slavery would go away. The importation ban again took place in 1808. Slavery was outlawed in parts of the country, and they also thought that states would reject slavery. However, due to unforeseen events in history, such as, for example, the cotton gin and its creation, slavery begins to actually grow and expand in the mostly southern section of the United States. So, what happened actually? Sengbe Pieh, we believe he was from, I think it's Liberia, or what is present day no, Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is where he's from, and he's captured and sold into slavery illegally. He and a group of others were sent across the Atlantic Ocean. The route that they took was again the Middle Passage, referring to this route section here. Oopsies. This section here as they're going from Africa to either South America, to the Caribbean, or to the United States. The journey took over 2 months. It was terrible. They're forced into cramped quarters. They received very little food and water. 1/3 of the enslaved men died. It was a terrible, terrible chapter in history. So what actually happened though? It goes back to again Sengbe Pieh. He was one of the third of the travelers, of the now in slaves who were forced on that journey. He arrives in Cuba and he is given a Spanish name. He becomes Joseph Cinque. And they were forced to adopt Spanish names so that eventually, when they were smuggled into the United States officials thought they would be children of slaves. Because again, according to 1808, you couldn't bring any more slaves into the US. You could smuggle them in, but it was against the law to actually import slave. Pieh is sold for $450. He and the others were board a ship called La Amistad, which will be bound for America. So these were slaves who were being imported and they were smuggled into the US. Singba, the text does a really good job explaining it, asks somebody, because he has no idea what's going on. He asks, I think, the cook, what's happening? And the cook makes a gesture like slitting his throat, saying that it's going to be terrible and it's going to be bad. And after that, he decides that he is going to stage a revolt and he wants to escape. And he and a group of other Sierra Leoneans overthrow the ship, killing most of their former masters. It was really cool. They set up this secret system. They communicated with each other through notes and they planned what to do. And eventually they took over the ship, killing most of the former masters. What Sengbe Pieh then does next is he tries to, if the boat is like right here, he tries to take it back to Sierra Leone, back to Africa. He doesn't know where it is, but he looks at the stars and the sun every night, and it becomes this like beacon of him, of how to get back home. However, several of the slave owners on the ship actually tricked um, the ship into turning it back around towards the United States. The slave owners were still trying to capitalize on it. And then eventually there was a storm, and the ship gets blown into, I think it's Maryland, and the U.S. importation officials see what's happening, and they see the imported slaves, and now there is a giant question of what to do. President Martin Van Buren was the president at the time of it, and there's a lot of questions and problems with this case. One of them was that black killed whites. This was something that many Southern plantation owners had feared would happen. This is the time period, again, it's 1839. Whoa, that was a bad note. I'm not very good with this pen yet. We're still about 21, 22 years away from the Civil War, but slavery has become the central issue defining American life. These slaves wanted their freedom, and the abolitionists were lauding their effort. The abolitionist, remember, is someone who wants to end slavery. They said, "This is awesome. We can use this as a way to promote anti-slavery sentiment." They thought Sengbe Pieh is a hero, which he was. There's also more international problems with this. A Spanish ship had been captured, and the Spanish ambassador called it an outrage. The captured ship had violated treaties between Spanish and English anti slavery laws. Would England then invade Cuba? So, all kinds of problems going on with the case then, too. So, what to do with Sengbe Pieh and the enslaved Africans who took over the ship and then were brought back into the United States? We're going to have several cases where lawyers will take it to the case and they'll argue and they say they should be free, they should be enslaved, they should be sent back home. I'm really not good with the pen. I think I need to figure out how to do that. But yeah, like what's going to happen with the cases? It goes eventually to the United States Supreme Court. There's two other steps here, but it goes to the Supreme Court where 5 of the 9 justices were from the South. And what happens next is really, really cool. Oh yeah, and just a quick vocabulary word because we're talking about slavery and Sengbe Pieh being sold for $450. You can describe slavery as asinine, extremely foolish and stupid. Appeal means to try the case in a higher court. The court in the case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, where John Quincy Adams, old man eloquent, decides to defend the representatives of Sengbe Pieh and his group. And he takes it before the case and he argues for their freedom, famously saying, "I know of no other law that reaches the case of my clients but the law of nature and of nature's God on which our fathers placed our own national existence." He is saying the law of nature dictates that slavery is wrong, and Sengbe Pieh and his representatives and his fellow enslaved Sierra Leoneans should be free. And he won the case. And it's cool. This was made into a movie. I've not seen it, but it's a Steven Spielberg movie called Amistad. I bet it's pretty cool. So again, if we remember, history is just a story, and just thinking about what happened with Sengbe Pieh and the revolt and the slavery and then the case, and then he won and he was free. This is a chapter of history that I think is awesome.